By week 12 of the NFL season, we now have a lot of information on which defenses are good against which position groups, who has good matchups and who has bad matchups. So today, I'm going to be breaking down the remaining strength of schedule as well as the playoff strength of schedules of all of the major fantasy relevant positions, going through my top 5 remaining and playoff schedules for quarterbacks, bottom 5 remaining and playoff schedules for quarterbacks, so on and so forth for running backs, wide receivers, and for tight ends, talking about who has great matchups, who has bad matchups, and some suggested moves that you guys can make if you have some of the players on these lists that we're going to talk about. So before we get into it, if you guys enjoyed at any point, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. Now let's get into it. All right, so let's get this thing kicked off with some quarterback talk. So you guys can see on the screen right now the remaining strength of schedule metric there. The top 5 teams in terms of remaining strength of schedule. You can see the Dallas Cowboys, New York Jets, San Francisco 49ers, Denver Broncos, and Baltimore Ravens. That means we have great matchups for the rest of the season for Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, Russell Wilson, and Lamar Jackson among fantasy relevant quarterbacks listed in this chart here. Those guys definitely you're going to want to upgrade expectations for them. And then on the right side of the screen here, you guys can see the playoff specific strength of schedule. So most people's fantasy playoffs are from weeks 15 through week 17. So those metrics there are only taken from that period of time. And these strength of schedule metrics are a combination of defensive DVOA versus that position, as well as adjusted fantasy points allowed based on opposing schedule to that position. So this is, in my opinion, the most accurate way to determine strength of schedule. And you guys can see some of the best playoff matchups go to quarterbacks like Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Matthew Stafford, Brock Purdy, and Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. And then conversely, you guys can see some of the most difficult remaining strength of schedules and playoff strength of schedules on my left and my right side, respectively. Some of the worst matchups rest of the season, we have Tua Tagovailoa, Trevor Lawrence, Sam Howell, and CJ Stroud. Those 5 teams, coincidentally, also have the worst matchups during the fantasy football playoffs. So we really want to downgrade expectations for those guys. In terms of suggested moves for the quarterback position, this video is going to be relatively quick. I'm just going to kind of go through the positions, talk about suggested moves. If you guys are streaming quarterbacks, by the looks of it, in terms of remaining strength of schedule, some of the best streaming options are Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, Russell Wilson, specifically for the fantasy playoffs. You can also see that Matthew Stafford and Will Levis would be decent options as well. I would say if you're going to prioritize some of these quarterbacks on the waivers or maybe in trades as throw-ins or something, Brock Purdy and Russell Wilson are at the top of that list for me. Dak Prescott as well, depending on what your league mates think of him. And then consider selling on some of these quarterbacks that have tougher matchups during the fantasy playoffs and for the rest of the season. Tua Tagovailoa being most notably the most difficult matchups for the rest of the year. CJ Stroud, of course, he's been really hot right now, so you can also potentially move off of the hype of CJ Stroud and downgrade to a different quarterback in theory. Maybe go from a Tua or a Stroud to a Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, or Brock Purdy. Go from guys with bad schedules to guys with good schedules, because especially at the quarterback position, strength of schedule does play a large part in terms of overall fantasy production. Hell, we just saw Tommy DeVito perform in one of the best matchups of the year. And then in terms of high-level moves, if you guys are trying to go from like a playoff team to a championship team, I would suggest going out and buying on Jalen Hurts. He has an elite schedule. If you're looking to upgrade to an elite quarterback rest of season, he would be the guy that I would go after. And I would also try and transition off of other like solid quarterback options like Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, like I said, Tua Tagovailoa, CJ Stroud, those type of guys. See how much more you have to give up to get to a guy like Jalen Hurts, because he has an absolute cupcake schedule down the stretch of the season. So the running back position, you guys can see on the screen the remaining strength of schedule, top 5 names there, and then the playoff strength of schedule, top 5 names there. Some of the best matchups remaining for the rest of the year, we have Jerome Ford, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, Isaiah Pacheco, and then the Baltimore Ravens running backs, Gus Edwards / Keaton Mitchell. Some of the best playoff matchups, so specifically in the fantasy playoffs, we have Jerome Ford, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, and DeAndre Swift. And then some of the worst playoff matchups and the worst rest of season matchups, you guys can see worst matchups rest of season. We have the Green Bay Packers running backs, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, because, I mean, A.J. Dillon's probably going to be starting for the next couple of games. Then we also have James Cook, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, and the Seahawks running backs because, of course, we know that Kenneth Walker is going to be banged up here. Zach Charbonnet might get a chance to start some games. And then in terms of some of the best or the worst playoff matchups here, we have Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, the Green Bay Packers running backs, the Seattle Seahawks running backs, and the Detroit Lions running backs. So a lot to unpack here. Some of my suggested moves based on this information would be to go out and buy Bijan Robinson because he is undervalued for a number of reasons, mainly due to Arthur Smith. He has such a great string of matchups in the fantasy playoffs: the Carolina Panthers, Indianapolis Colts, and Week 17 versus the Chicago Bears. A very, very easy matchup for fantasy running backs, the easiest one in the league. So with Bijan Robinson, definitely go out and send some offers for him because he could absolutely win people leagues down the stretch because he's a young running back. He's very talented. And if the usage corrects itself and Arthur Smith gets his head out of his ass, then we could be talking about a guy that wins people leagues. Derrick Henry might seem washed to most of your league mates if they're paying attention right now because, Derrick Henry hasn't had the greatest stretch of the season so far. He's been very inconsistent. But starting as soon as this week against Carolina, he has elite matchups across the board. Every matchup that Derrick Henry and the Tennessee Titans play versus the run are top 15 matchups against fantasy running backs, except for the Seattle Seahawks in Week 16. So pretty much every game except for one, this guy has an awesome matchup, and that's kind of the game environment we want with Derrick Henry. If the Titans are able to run the ball, usually their offense is better, and Derrick Henry can get going. So definitely gauge his price on your open market right now. If you can swap guys like Joe Mixon, like Saquon Barkley, like Kenneth Walker, maybe you can even get Derrick Henry plus for a guy like Saquon Barkley coming off of a big game. Definitely go out and try and do that. I'm not usually an advocate for buying a guy like Derrick Henry, but I think his price has fallen to a point that people are willing to sell lower on him, and also this great schedule at the end of the year really bodes well for Derrick Henry. So a couple other moves here: Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, and Isaiah Pacheco also make pretty good trade targets if you guys are looking for, high-end RB1 production. Buy low on Austin Eckler. If you're looking for mid RB1 production, buy low or buy high, I guess, on DeAndre Swift. And if you're looking for a decent option that has a really good schedule down the stretch as well, high-end RB2 type like Isaiah Pacheco is also probably available in your league market. Maybe consider selling high on some of these Lions running backs as well. Knowing the strength of schedule, it could be difficult for both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery to get there every single week. Of course, we've seen them be both productive, but if you can go from Jahmyr Gibbs to Travis Etienne or Bijan Robinson, I think you should definitely do that. If you can go from, Jahmyr Gibbs to Jonathan Taylor, you should definitely do that. Or maybe you can go from David Montgomery and go after a Breece Hall type or a Josh Jacobs type coming off of a down game. Definitely explore the open market because the Lions running backs do have a difficult schedule, and because they split a backfield, that could definitely impact them to a high degree. So the wide receiver position, again, you guys can see on my left the remaining strength of schedule for wide receivers. On my right, the playoff strength of schedule for wide receivers. Got a lot of great matchups here for CeeDee Lamb, for the Seahawks wide receivers, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Demario Douglas, who I talked about on the waiver show earlier today. Marquise Brown, also with some easy matchups down the stretch. And then Michael Pittman Jr. / Josh Downs, the Indianapolis Colts wide receivers, with some good matchups down the stretch. And then as far as great playoff matchups, CeeDee Lamb hears his name again, as does Marquise Brown and the Seahawks receivers. All three of those guys really, really good trade targets right now / good stashes as well. Cortland Sutton also has some pretty good matchups during the fantasy playoffs. I mean, I guess you could group in Jerry Jeudy there as well, but Cortland Sutton has been the main culprit there for Russell Wilson. He's been the main guy in the red zone, especially with 8 touchdowns on the season. And then Devontae Adams, just coming off of a big game this week, he does have a very good and favorable strength the schedule during the fantasy football playoffs. And then some of the wide receivers that have difficult matchups during the fantasy football playoffs, we have Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, the Jaguars wide receivers, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, the Commanders wide receivers, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the Dolphins wide receivers, and then one-offs Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons and an Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. Those guys, not the greatest rest of season matchups. Maybe consider selling on some of those guys, especially Calvin Ridley, who's coming off of a big game. Bad playoff matchups for Kirk and Ridley, Diggs and Davis of the Bills, Amari Cooper, A.J. Brown and Smith of the Eagles, and then Garrett Wilson of the Jets. So again, keep all of these players in mind when it comes to suggested moves. Of course, add Demario Douglas if he is available on your waiver wire because he has some great matchups down the stretch. Buy low on Marquise Brown, especially because he has not really had a good performance since Kyler Murray has been back, and I do think that will turn itself around at some point. Michael Pittman Jr. also had some poor performances in recent weeks. He has a really good schedule, as does Josh Downs down the stretch, so consider buying low on those guys. And then with Devontae Adams and CeeDee Lamb, those guys are studs. Probably just hold them if you have them, but maybe send out some offers and see what you can get them for. And then hold Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett as solid flex pieces. I probably wouldn't go out and buy those guys because I am kind of worried about, the Seahawks offense specifically because there's been a lot of target distribution there. But I will say, if you have them, you definitely don't want to sell them now while they have these great playoff schedules, because you're probably not going to get what you want to get out of those guys. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba remains a pretty good stash as a high upside rookie wide receiver who could turn it on down the stretch of the season. And then consider selling high on guys like Calvin Ridley, maybe sell high on a guy like Amari Cooper, who's got a lot of targets so far this year given the offense, and maybe even Drake London as well, given the schedule that all those guys have and given the sketchy nature of all of their target shares on a week-over-week basis. So the tight end position, and then we'll close this video out. You guys can see some of the great matchups on my left, some of the great playoff matchups on my right. Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson, Isaiah Likely, Trey McBride, and Sam Laporta with great rest of season matchups. So if you have those guys, definitely good news for you. And then great playoff matchups specifically. We have good matchups in line for Isaiah Likely and for Sam Laporta among fantasy relevant tight ends. The rest of those guys not really fantasy relevant unless Greg Dulcich comes back from injury and is really good, which I don't anticipate happening. And then bad matchups rest of the season, you guys can see Luke Musgrave, Dalton Schultz, and George Kittle. And then bad playoff matchups, we have Evan Ingram, Luke Musgrave, Dallas Goedert, assuming he's back at this point in time, and Dalton Kincaid. So suggested moves at the tight end position. I mean, it's pretty easy not to overthink the obvious here. Travis Kelce is on the downslope currently after a bad week and hinting at retirement, but he does have the easiest strength of schedule of any tight end rest of the season. So if you can go send offers to tier up from a Sam Laporta or a Dalton Kincaid or somebody like that, a George Kittle coming off of a big week, go out and send some offers for Travis Kelce. Isaiah Likely is a priority waiver ad if you guys are in need of a tight end. Maybe you lost Mark Andrews or something like that. He has a really good schedule rest of the season. He is a top 15 tight end for me in my rest of season rankings. With TJ Hawkinson, with Sam Laporta, and Trey McBride, all of these guys are top 6 options for me rest of season, especially given their strength of schedule. So go buy low on some of these guys if you can, especially Sam Laporta, who has had 2 down games in a row, and people are starting to panic a little bit on him. He is a top 5 tight end for me rest of seasons. I have no concerns about Sam Laporta, so go out and send some offers for him. And then if you have, Luke Musgrave, it looks like he has a bad schedule. You probably can just cut bait with him. Go out and stash a handcuff instead. Go out and get Isaiah Likely instead if you want a better tight end option. And consider upgrading from guys like Dalton Schultz, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, or Dalton Kincaid, because all of these guys have difficult schedules down the stretch. See how much you can go from Dalton Kincaid all the way up to Travis Kelce. How much more would it cost you to do that? How much more would it cost you to go from Dalton Schultz to Sam Laporta, for example? See what you can kind of do in terms of your open market. So again, this video was meant to be more informative. I'm sure a lot of you guys just kind of wanted to see where your strength of schedule aligned. Of course, I only covered top 5 at each position, but if you do want access to all of this data, all the strength of schedule data will be available in our link down below in the pinned comment on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSE will get you access to our weekly rankings, matchup charts, which this strength of schedule stuff is available in, and also a new feature on Flock Fantasy. We'll be doing a bonus video episode every single week. This week's video was on in-season trading in Dynasty Fantasy Football League, so you're definitely going to want to watch that if you guys are contenders trying to make trades, or if you guys are trying to tear it down and make some trades. That video is really, really informative, and you can only get that on flockfantasy.com. So if you've been on the fence recently and you don't know if you should have been signing up, we will be launching a new exclusive video content every single week. So make sure you're going to want to be signed up over there. Use the promo code FSE when you sign up for 30% off, plus 6 months for free if you sign up annually as well, plus a free Zoom consultation if you sign up annually. So all that will be linked down below in the pinned comment if you're interested. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.